Hello, everyone. You're in the Aether, and I'm your host, Cody Fry. Welcome back for Season 1, Episode 4. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining me. We've got a great show lined up here for you today. In a moment, we'll be joined by Jim Perry, host and producer of Euphomet, and we're going to be discussing the paranormal, spirituality, UFOs, and all kinds of other fun stuff, including a pretty crazy experience Jim had recently. And if you know anything about Jim or his travels, he's had some experiences, so this one should be significant. I can't wait to get to that. Now, I think the overall theme of this episode is acknowledging and being open to the unknown, while also keeping one foot in the reality we know, appreciating the meaningfulness of both places. How do we cultivate that? How do we deal with questions when we're quite possibly not even ready for the answers? How do we maintain this profound interest in these subjects and these peripheral phenomena and work to better understand them and not spin out? As I've alluded to before, it's really easy to get lost in this stuff, to be consumed by it and never find your way back. And we search so hard for the meaning in all of it. And there's nothing wrong with dipping your toe into the strange waters now and then, or even just diving in sometimes. In fact, I encourage everyone to at least try it once, right? But you can't live there. You know, you got to remember to leave that trail of breadcrumbs so you can find your way back home. I don't think it does us any good to turn ourselves off to enjoying the, quote, normal, right? Again, you search for meaning, you search for answers in these things, and you don't find them a lot of times. And yes, that's frustrating and disappointing, but you know, you got to learn how to walk a tightrope if you're really going to get into these subjects, because once you start swaying, it's probably game over, isn't it? And once you fall off, it's hard. It's hard to pick yourself up and find your way back. So try and maintain that balance. And, you know, I think Jim does a great job doing that, and we're going to be talking to him in just a moment. But first, just a quick shout out to everybody who's shown their support for the show. I do see a lot of new followers on Facebook and Instagram. So our little community is growing every day. I'm really excited about that. I'm grateful for you guys. So thank you. The downloads are definitely increasing, which is a great sign as well. The one thing the show needs more than anything right now, however, is exposure on iTunes. And I know, of course, not everybody has or uses iTunes, right? But it is currently, and probably for the foreseeable future, the biggest platform for podcasts there is, by a mile, whether we like that or not. So if you have it, even if you just use it once in a while, can you take a minute and show your support by subscribing, rating, and leaving a review? I have a really simple goal on iTunes right now of reaching 25 reviews, and that's going to go a long ways, and I know we can do that. 25 doesn't sound like a lot because it's really not. And it's super easy. You can do it straight from your podcast app on your iPhone or go to iTunes. So once again, thank you guys for helping make the Aether more visible. Your support truly means the world. All right, we'll be back right after this with Mr. Jim Perry. Stay with me. Jim, welcome to the show, man.
Cody, how's it going, my friend?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm sitting here in my studio. I'm surrounded by envelopes and mail and every bit of administrative bullshit that you could imagine when you're not home weeks.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I bet. So you were away for a bit there, but it sounds like you're back in good old Seattle.
Yeah. I was in New York. I was doing 2 episodes of Euphomet over there with some
Nice.
folks.
Okay.
And that was part of kind of like a 3-week continuous trip where
Wow.
I was just doing Euphomet the entire time. And that spanned a bunch of different states, a bunch of different cities, a bunch of different spooky haunted houses and shit. So
Nice. That sounds pretty amazing.
it was amazing. It was intense, and it was super fun. So,
well, that's great, man. I'm glad you made it back home safe. And listen, I know you're a busy guy, so thanks for taking the time out to come on. It really means a lot.
Of course, man. I think you're doing some real stuff. I had the opportunity to check out some of your work at the airport the other day. Actually, I downloaded a few episodes, hit the subscribe button.
Thank you.
And I think you're doing some really interesting, intriguing stuff, and I love what you're doing and playing with the format of what people typically hear with paranormal. And yeah, so I'm stoked. I'm stoked to talk to you.
Well, thank you, man. I'm humbled, and same here. So your show, Euphomet, I've been a listener, a fan for a few years. And for those of you that don't know, Jim did the Euphomet pod there for a bit, kind of took a break, and just recently returned. Thankfully, we can get into that later if you want. But my impression of your show is it's always been kind of like this cool indie short film minus the film part, you know? The ambiance, definitely the music, the people, the stories, the radio diaries, as you call them. They just all come together and form this really unique, immersive experience. It's one of those shows I kind of have to remember each time, oh, right, this is Euphomet. I need to clear my mind a little here. As soon as I hit play, I know it's this like swirling vortex that sucks you into Jim Perry's rabbit hole. You're there till, whenever it's over, wandering around these strange otherworldly places with you. You're kind of guiding us through it. Sometimes these places are incredibly uplifting. Other times they're disturbing, unfamiliar, or strange. But in the process, the listener, us, we really get to know the people sharing their lives and experiences with you on this kind of deeper, intimate level. So I wanted to start off by first acknowledging a question you posed on one of your recent episodes that I really liked, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you asked, when the other side reaches out its hand to you, do you reach back? Do you let it help change your life? And my first question is, the people you're drawn to, that you feature or interview, they obviously speak to you, Jim Perry, on this really intimate, almost sacred level, right? I'm sure they've changed your life in some pretty profound ways. Can you maybe touch on what some of those ways are? In other words, are you a better person for it? And if so, how and why?
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Thank you for turning my own question around on me there.
Yeah.
That's fairly profound in terms of when I wrote that question, was really at the start of this new process of the show. And since then, I've met so many people and had so many more experiences that if I were to answer myself very directly with that, it's that sometimes you do take that hand and you let that experience, you let that person, you let that entity perhaps change your life. And how it changes your life is it challenges your idea and concept of what all of this really is. And through that, I do begin to appreciate things a little bit more, maybe.
Right.
I could see where others, like, really, instead of taking the hand, they jump into the arms of this stuff, and they say, "Carry me away for the rest of my life." I can be that way
at times. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very easy to happen.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, one of the biggest challenges for me in Euphomet now is having, the Newkirks and I talk about this a lot, who are great paranormal investigators.
Love those guys.
Having 1 foot in and 1 foot out is so very important for all of us, because the changes that can affect you in terms of when these experiences start stacking up, and there's proof that you have in yourself, both sort of within 3D reality and more.
Right.
You have to kind of take a step back from all of that and take effort to remain grounded in the sense of who you are as a human. So I have taken that hand. I have let it lead me into some dark, interesting, shadowy places, and some other places that are sort of filled with life and a lot of love and a lot of curiosity. But then returning home after 3 weeks of that nonstop, you you kind of remember all that's really precious to you in this life right now.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
It is. Yeah, I agree. 1 foot in, 1 foot out, like you said, that makes a lot of sense to me. That kind of leads to my next question here then. So considering all the work you're dedicated to, the traveling, the interviews, producing the show, out there connecting with people in these really cool, genuine ways, sharing their stories, and then considering the Western world in which you and I live, it has the reputation, and I think it comes by it honestly, of prioritizing money and social status over spirituality and kindness. And Americans, we're known for measuring success and happiness by acquiring shit, right?
Yeah.
We're a society that plays it safe and toes the line, etc. Looking at something that looks back at you, that forces you to turn the microscope back on yourself, is hard. So we're not exactly known for being the most enlightened, spiritually intelligent corner of the world here. But I think, if you're a human being, you think about this stuff, no matter where you're from. Everyone contemplates the unknown, the strange, some perhaps more than others, but we're all wanderers, aren't we? It's part of who we are and what we are. So yeah, although there's a lot of truth to all of that, I think it's really more a matter of shifting priorities than anything else. So that said, what role do you see yourself playing in all this, Jim? I mean, you certainly have a knack for storytelling, but do you feel any sort of greater sense of responsibility in all this, in the work you dedicate so much time to?
Yeah, I really do. I become more and more profound as I move along, and not to loud myself too much, but I think I do have this sense of responsibility. I do have an audience. I do have listeners. I am building community. And within that, it has made me more respectful in terms of the stories that I choose,
right,
and sort of how I react to certain things, and what my place is in things and what my place isn't. What I hope that the show does is elicit an emotional response from folks to unbelievable and unknowable events and unfathomable, fringe personalities and experiences. And I think if folks can begin to sort of open up their hearts and just have fun in believing and dipping your toe into this stuff, that I think, just like its effect on me in terms of my ability to separate myself enough from that material to see the preciousness in all of it, I think that's a win. I think if people can start thinking about, so listen, one of the things I talk with my friends offline and not really related to the show is that I think Euphomet does have a place in, if vibrations are real, if frequencies are real, if that sort of energy passed between human to human that spreads across the universe, if there's legitimacy to that, then I want to be a part of raising that. I want to be a part of having people become more curious, having people ask more questions, and also being okay that maybe there's not an answer.
Yeah.
Maybe there's not an answer to your question, And so, yeah, that's what I hope I'm responsible for. More positivity, not exactly in a new thought way, but maybe a little bit, maybe a little bit of that.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, man. You mentioned kind of raising people up. That's a good segue to my next question. Something else I wanted to ask you about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been to the ESETI Ranch in Trout Lake up there in Washington, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, a few times, actually.
Yep, I thought so. Now, for those of you that don't know, ESETI stands for Enlightened Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It's an organization run by James Gilliland. In fact, doesn't he hold the Skywatches at his home there?
He does, yeah.
Okay.
His abode,
nice,
is right next to the field. Yeah.
Okay. And again, those of you unfamiliar, the idea is people gather together, usually over the course of a weekend, I believe, and they participate in these, I think, meditative sessions is a fair term, with this sort of peaceful intent to communicate with off-world intelligences, to exchange and share information. The ultimate goal, I believe, as Gilliland puts it, is to align with them, to move humanity forward into this more aware, evolved, spiritual plane. And when you say it that way, it may sound a little heady, but the results don't lie. I mean, people usually do see stuff in the sky. Typically, they're described as lights that seem to have an intelligence. And perhaps what I find more interesting is it's pretty common as well to hear about this sort of inner dialogue that takes place between, I don't know, us and them. like we're observing one another, exchanging information, communicating. I wondered if you could share a significant experience or two you had doing that, and did it confirm anything for you or just produce more questions or both?
You know, going to E-City was a challenging experience, actually. I went in with the intent to have no expectations, yet I was loaded up with them, right? I've listened to James Gilliland on paranormal radio shows for years.
And I mean, how could you not go in with at least some expectations, right?
Exactly. Right. Exactly. You know, so you are expecting, you know, wild lights. You are expecting some form of verification of some of these stories.
Yeah.
And, you know, you go in and it's interesting because there's also just normal campers there. There's people that are kind of like, okay, well, this is a cool, you know, spot in Trout Lake. It's beautiful out here. We're just normal folks. Then there's folks that are there for the very physical sort of interaction with these lights, with the lights that emerge on the mountain, you know, possibly a Sasquatch or something, or other spiritual beings. They want physical proof. So they're there with their photo equipment and their, you know, readers and all this technology and gizmos and shit. And then there are others who are there for a spiritual connection. And these are usually the folks that do participate in the various forms of divination and meditation and mediation that's available at the ranch.
Yeah.
And these are with folks that are privy to working in light languages. They are mediums that use such things as table tipping to, you know, produce connections with angelic beings and aliens, all alleged, of course. But you know, on my second trip there, I went with my bud Tim Rothschild.
Yes.
Who's this great non-dual Kabbalistic shaman, healer, and just a terrific down to earth guy.
He's got his own podcast too, right? I forgot the name.
Yeah. On the Third Thing Network, he has the Divine Movement podcast.
That's the one. Yep.
Him and his partner Gina Turner, they do also the Open Heart Army. So it's some really great, enlightening, fun stuff.
Yeah, I wanted to throw that out there. Yeah, because I've heard a bit of it, and I thought people might want to check that out. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, when Tim and I went, we decided we were to dive deep into everything that was offered there. So we went and attended table tipping ceremonies. We went and walked through this facsimile of the universe out in the field and attempted to connect with whoever our parents were, or you know, whatever sort of system that we were a part of. And truthfully, you know, even I tried to meet it with a really open mind and open heart, but at that time I couldn't do it, Cody. Like
you weren't in that place.
No, man. It woke up a place in me where I was like, nah.
Right.
I was like, I became, like so closed down. I shut down from it. I think it was just too much, and it was too out there for me at that time, and I couldn't even meet it with a.
Oh, sorry. Was Tim feeling apprehensive about it too, or just mostly you?
I think Tim is more initiated in the circle of, you know, dealing with mysticism in a different way. But fair enough. But I think the extraterrestrial involvement in some of this stuff was, I don't want to speak for Tim, but I think I would be incorrect saying that it was challenging for him as well. That being said, we're there, we're communing with some of the nicest people. You know, James Gilliland, he's a really sweet guy. Had us in for dinner. You know, we had these great conversations with the crew the people that were working on the ranch. And so it was a really enlightening and positive experience, but it did challenge my belief system and how far I could initiate myself. And I found at that moment that I think that might actually be a skill set for me. I think that might actually be something that I could lean into. And I say that because at that moment in time during that second trip, I was really questioning my ability to not spin out on some of this stuff. You know, one of the reasons I paused production of Youth because I was feeling spun out. I was feeling like, you know, what's real here? You know, how do I negate all anecdotal or particular, very specific evidence that there's something greater than what's here in reality or conscious belief.
Yeah.
And after going several rabbit holes and having just a few experiences here and there, including my first trip to ECETI, where the amount of anomalous light activity, the light activity on the mountain that was unexplained, there were not hikers.
But you actually saw it visually.
Yeah.
Okay.
And these were, and I can go into a little bit. These were things like anomalous lights that would be on the base of the mountain. This mountain being miles, would zip past this thing at the base of the mountain like nothing else. And then these lights that would cruise into our vision over the sky, heading towards the mountain, and then like a crazy turn out of nowhere that would be just really unconventional from a satellite or any terrestrial vehicle. So this sort of action happened almost the entire time I was there the first time. And that alone made me sort of like it although I had my own handful of what I would qualify as UFO sightings or experiences, they just paled so much in comparison to what I experienced at the ranch that night. And so upon a second trip, and then diving into all these other very metaphysical, very, by popular standards, very out there concepts of our relationship and with reality and extraterrestrials.
It's a lot, isn't it? For us poor uninitiated.
Yeah, man, it really
right.
It really is,
because we all got our own expectations going into something like that, like you said, and our expectations are just not always going to align with another's.
Well, what I don't like in life, I don't like certainty. And so I think that when, even though I can greatly with people that have very stringent beliefs, like I get it, and I can become emotionally attached to these folks, and I can help interpret and tell their story. For me personally, I think I really hate the idea of thinking I know it all, or that I know something's for sure. I think the only thing that I know for sure is that I don't know anything at all, and I'm not even sure about that. Right, so that's a quote I stole from somewhere, but it feels so
it's
apt.
a good one.
So I think
I'll use that myself.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that second time he said, he really proved that to me. It proved that in situations where there's extreme certainty, I will recoil, and I think that's a tool, and I think it's a gift maybe.
I think it's a good instinct.
Will allow me to keep one foot out, 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a good place to be, I think. You mentioned the Newkirks. So since you brought them up, I know you've been doing a lot of work with these guys. For those of you that don't know, Greg and Dana Newkirk, they run the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult.
Okay. And so again, if you guys don't know what the Newkirks do, is it's what it sounds like. They have this mobile exhibition that they travel around, and they set up so that people can come visit them, and their artifacts. They have hundreds, if I'm not mistaken, of these possibly haunted items that they've got from various people. They each have a story, and it's pretty fascinating. And so, yeah, I mean, did you want to talk a little bit about what you've been up to with the Newkirks lately?
Yeah. What's great about Greg and Dana is the fact that we're all very close in age, so all of our dumb pop culture references really are able to pop off. But they are tired and true actual investigators. Greg has this great organized, skeptical yet open-hearted approach to investigation, and Dana is very empathetic. She's a witch. She's very in touch with so many different energy forms, not only in terms of interpreting them, but actually manipulating them as well, I think. So it's interesting because I think those guys, I think we work well because I'm not that, and I don't want to be that. Like, I'm not trying to be the next, ghost hunter or whatever. I'm just trying to tell stories. And so for me, it allows me a chance to get boots on the ground in certain situations, involve anomalous activity, and use them as sort of a filter for that.
Yeah.
And it works really well because I'm able, I think, to illuminate certain things within stories or situations or experiences that really resonate with them on a creative level. And so we're great creative partners in that, and we enjoy spending time with each other. And I'm building these relationships with a bunch of people now in this community, and very same sort of mindset. And so they're a really good example of that. And most recently, Greg and I actually went down into the hollers of West Virginia. We met with this guy named Wesley and explored also a little bit of the Flatwoods Monster. We went to some of the sites where this event happened in the 1940s. And mostly we found ourselves in a haunted hotel at about, maybe like midnight or so, with a reluctant medium in West Virginia.
Okay.
Who Greg was helping find his sort of form and his ability to communicate with some entities that were perhaps a little bit hostile. I will say about that experience that I think thus far, in terms of anything I've done with Euphomet, is frightening is not the right word, but I guess the most anxious I've ever been was perhaps that experience. We were in this 3-story historic building that had a lifespan of all sorts of traumas and incidents and activities, and functionally was everything from a hostel to a brothel, right in coal country, in a very sort of derelict main street, very symbolic of what I think people would think about, like sort of wild West Virginia. And being there on the 3rd floor of this place and walking through these shadowy halls where furniture remained from nearly a century ago, the history residue in that place, even sort of physically within our 3D space, was alarming. And I think that alone informed a lot of nerves between all 3 of us. The slight cool breeze that would run down the hall as we would kind of descend into darkness. There was a certain doorway at the end of this hall that Wesley felt was very active and contained a story, essentially, in which these entities, these ghost-like to him that he could see with his own eyes, were living out past traumas on repeat in a loop, and in which he could essentially extend himself into that space and communicate with them. I felt it really in my fascia, like deep
right
between my flesh and bones. I felt this sort of chill and this kind of pain. And
so it's physical as well.
Yeah, very much so, man, and hard to describe in earthly words. But on that night, we came back into the light. There was a single lamp in this room in between. It was like sort of a lobby area. We were flanked by all these empty rooms. Some of them with half-cracked open doors. Some of them with letting a little bit of the street below. But there was a stillness and a calmness. And it was almost like we were around a campfire in the middle of the wilderness at that point. And anything that could be in the shadows, lurking with eyes, knowing like we couldn't see it, right? It was just on the periphery.
Not creepy at all.
Not creepy at all, right? So, I'm standing there, and I have a microphone in Wesley's face. Greg is standing next to me, and behind Wesley's shoulder is that hallway, is that deep, dark hallway, and that room at the end of it. And for the first time in my life, I saw what would classically be known as a ghost. as a physical form of a bust of a human-like figure that was illuminated and ghostly and fog-like. And I saw this thing exit that hallway towards that room that had so much energy associated with it and dissipate. And walk is not the right word. It would be float. It would be, kind of phase, perhaps even. And I've never thought going into Euphomet that I would have an experience where I would physically see something like that. Because, you hear it. You hear about, I saw this phantom-like, this illuminated silhouette, or, I saw that. And that was a defining experience. And I think it was a milestone in terms of what I can expect in terms of my relationship to the show and my relationship to what it is, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm left with this sort of task to not compartmentalize that, but find the words to communicate these anecdotal stories that happen along with the show even. Right. And then rest into a state of normalcy at the same time. I can't these things too seriously at the same time. I have to kind of keep them in their own space. Yes.
And perhaps a little harder to do when you've seen a ghost, but you mentioned 1 foot in and 1 out. So how do you reconcile what you saw then?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been told that at some point in time I'm gonna make a stand. You know what I mean? Tim tells me this all the time. It's like, someday you're gonna have to just say you believe in something. And I would, maybe he's right, but right now I feel it's just a very interesting element to this exploration. I think it's what makes Euphomet very interesting. Is at this point I have the ability now to share all of my experiences that are outside of the show. I mean, it's very unlikely that ghost encounter or whatever that was, whatever I saw, it's very unlikely that will even be included in the show, because the show's not really about me. The show is about the subject and the audience relationship. So I am very fortunate. I'm very lucky that I come on to shows like yours and talk about this kind of stuff in a more candid way, in a very non-produced way. Yeah. And, just kind of share these experiences. They're pretty pivotal to, I think, the making process of this stuff. Right. And also, on another angle, continue chipping away at people's belief systems and throwing a little wrench into their process. Yeah, no, I like that. And I like the approach you're taking to, not only with the show, but with yourself, this agnostic, there's probably no way I can know for sure approach. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get you on, because I feel the same way. At the end of the day, I entertain many theories, but I have to admit, I just don't know. Like you said, maybe there aren't answers at all to some of this stuff, or maybe the answers are just unknowable to us. And we got to somehow come to terms with that. But I think we can still observe it and document it. The phenomena does present itself to us from time to time, so we can at least do that. And maybe that's all we can do sometimes. And I wanted to ask you before I forget, since a lot of times people are pretty closed off to stuff like paranormal, UFOs, NDEs, etc., until something happens that forces them to confront it. My question for you then would be, is there any event or time period in your life that totally changed your trajectory toward where you are today? Or is there a crossroads moment in your past that you had, or have you always kind of known one way or another you'd end up more or less here doing what you're doing now? Well, what's funny about that is that I would add to your statement, in my opinion, that folks can even have that moment, but disregard it and just slip right back into like a bias against all of that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? They can, they can see a full body apparition, and then dissuade themselves from sort of its significance or their belief, and never talk about it, and just kind of like cruise right through. Yeah, never talk about it. It's not a thing. So it is interesting because it's a very transitory relationship with some folks in this stuff. For myself, I have had quite a few experiences now, especially in terms of the show. Coincidences are, I mean, such a running, powerful, profound paradigm in terms of understanding of, yeah, man, oof.
They're real. I mean, what they are exactly, it's hard to say, but they're definitely a thing.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that everybody has a story like that. And I think it's spooky enough, yet distant from common paranormal tropes, that those are mostly accepted. And I think they're a good entry point for a lot of people to understand that the universe is maybe playing a game with us.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Here we go. Are you ready to play? Here's a little thing.
Forcing you to pay attention.
Yeah, 100%. I'll share a story real quick about where I think some of my fundamental openness to this came from. And it's something I remember just a week ago, essentially. And that's when I was a kid. You know, I had the experience of watching my mom go over to a going over to a telephone and picking it up and talking to my grandma before it rang, and seeing my grandma do the same exact thing, walking over to the telephone and beginning to talk to my mom before that thing even rang. And they would do that all the time. I mean, it was not out of the ordinary. Like, if it wasn't nearly every day, it was at least several times a week. That they would just know when each other was calling them. And this was before, this was like way before cell phones. This was way before ID. There wasn't some tonal thing. It was just they had that connection together psychically, whatever that was, that they'd be able to do that all the time, like without fail. So I think right there, I noticed that as a kid, and I grew up with that, and it became normal. Yet, that's not a normal thing.
Right. Well, it reminds me of twins, actually. That uncanny connection between one another. I've seen that.
Yeah.
That's what it reminds me of. Huh.
Yeah, for sure. And if there's something to do with a more resonance or an energy field, or sort of a shared consciousness, that maybe there's a connection more deeply with certain individuals, whatever that means, it was something that I experienced as a kid that essentially really, I think, my internal pathways for knowing and at least taking this stance that things are not always what they appear, and the world's not always what we are presented.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We're getting towards the end here. So, Jim, are there any particular events or projects coming up you're especially excited about that you want to share with folks real quick?
To be honest, I'm excited to be home for like
Understand.
Just let myself repair and maybe watch a little TV and read some books and stuff, and get to work on all the episodes that we went and produced over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, you got a little work ahead of you.
Yeah, so I'm very excited to dig into that tape. Very excited exploring those stories and how we tell them best. And then really, I'm already looking forward. So November is going to be a very busy month again, with me going out and capturing more experiences and getting back on the road and digging my heels in and getting into all sorts of mind-altering, reality-poking business.
That sounds awesome.
that I hope will entertain and enjoy. And yeah.
Well, I really look forward to checking that out. As soon as you release those episodes, I'll be on it. And that time went by way too fast, man. Your website, of course, is Euphomet.com. Your show's on iTunes. You're on social media. Jim, anywhere in particular you want to direct folks to check out and support your work?
I mean, the best way really is the website and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. For Twitter and Instagram, they can follow it at Euphomet, or my personal one, which is the most active, is at It's Jim Perry. And that's for both Twitter and Instagram. And I encourage people to follow those, and they'll get to see like sort of a little peek in the process and see what I'm doing.
Right on. Remember, guys, head over to Jim's website, euphomet.com. There's also a survey there. Take that if you get a chance. It does help. Mr. Perry, thanks again so much for taking the time here. I enjoyed this talk, and I hope we can do this again really soon, man.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. Keep up the good work over there.
Yeah, will do. Thanks again, Jim. Take care, sir.
All right, cheers.
Bye. So big thanks again to Jim, who I think is just an overall great, level-headed, deeply curious guy who genuinely cares about these subjects and people's experiences. And for those of you new to his work, I really encourage you should go check that out. I mean, for example, here's a guy who just traveled cross-country to do this boots on the ground, real, very personal research. And he's going to be sharing that with his community of listeners, his audience, who I think mean a great deal to Jim. He acknowledges that responsibility he feels for being that messenger of stories from the other side, right? And he's trying to do it in this really positive way. So I really respect that and his dedication to really documenting this stuff in a thorough but totally unique way. And of course, I will include info on where to find him in the show notes. So if you need that info, it'll be there. So again, the overall takeaway for me on today's episode here is that we all have our own reasons for getting into this weird stuff, but the overall goal, I think, is understanding. There's almost certainly no doubt that there's this other reality. It's just a breath away from our everyday consciousness, it seems. And we desperately want to know, like, what's happening in that space, right? But then the other questions just come flooding through, like, what separates us from it? Are these two distinct realities even separate at all? What if they're one and we just don't have that capacity to pan out far enough to see it? How and why does it occasionally interface and mingle with us? How are some people more receptive than others? Is there something innate inside us that facilitates that connection? Is it stronger or more present in other people? And why? Why is that? Is it exposure to something early in life? Is it just a matter of being open? How do people that have never had that glimpse of the other reconcile the fact that others have had that glimpse? As I've said a bit earlier, when you look at these types of phenomena, they tend to look back at you. People talk about it all the time. They receive these little nods and winks from the phenomenon, like it's confirming it knows you're aware of it, but now it's aware of you too. I mean, just look at Jim's experience here. That's a great example of somebody who's been looking directly at the paranormal for years. And yeah, he'd occasionally get that nudge, that wink from the other side from time to time. And then he finally saw for the first time an apparition that night. Whether this entity or its energy, its essence, right, was really trapped there, stuck in some loop, reliving some past trauma, I really don't know. I know a lot of researchers have come to that conclusion after years of study, but either way, I don't think my opinion of what that may have been matters. It's what Jim took away from it. It was his experience, and he owns that now. So I found it utterly fascinating, and I hope you all did as well. And remember, if you have any personal stories or experiences you want to share, please email me at theethershow@gmail.com. And if you're interested in becoming a guest on the show and sharing your story, I'd be happy to talk to you about that too. Remember to follow the Aether Podcast Facebook page, and you can also follow me on Instagram at Aether_show. That's AETHER. And don't forget, guys, it's not free to produce this show, but it's completely free to support it. And you can do that by subscribing, rating, and reviewing on iTunes. By doing that, you're joining the community in the effort that the show's foundation stands on. And I want you all to be a part of that. So let's see if we can get those 25 reviews. and turn that into 125, okay? So again, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thanks again for joining me in the Aether. We'll see you next time.